You're listening to the Unwritable Rant podcast with your host and bourbon-soaked storyteller, Juliette Miranda.
Hi there, y'all. It's Juliette Miranda, and welcome to episode 240 of the Unwritable Rant podcast. I have a very bourbon-soaked story for you about lathering over LaLaurie and shedding dead weight. But first, y'all know me, I need to suck down some bourbon. Cheers, y'all. Oh, this is so hair of the dog, y'all. You have no idea. We had a late night. My guy and I were out on the town here in New Orleans, and we had such a ball. It's so cool because New Orleans is kind of coming back to life. I love it. We've been here for about 5 months or so. And we're seeing so many new things opening up. I mean, fewer restrictions on bars and restaurants. There was an actual festival last night. And now we're even seeing more tourists. I will admit that since we've gotten here, it's been very useful to have a few months of quiet. You know, without the usual crowds of people, my guy and I could get better acclimated, learn our way around, and of course, it's given us a chance to become regulars at our favorite bars. There are several of them that we frequent, sometimes both of us and sometimes just me alone, and we adore them all for very different reasons. One bar makes a killer old-fashioned, another has a nook that I like for writing, but the one thing that they all have in common is history. Nothing is better than sitting down in a place that has a story to tell. Beyond every bleeding door and brick fireplace, there's a person who was there first, earlier than any of us, who still talks in their own way. And I'll tell you, I'm listening. My guy might argue that I am listening maybe a little too closely and with a tad too much enthusiasm. Because unfortunately, for as much as I like to believe that I know about the French Quarter, there's a lot that I do not know. Specifically, I am lacking $300 worth of information. I learned this unfortunate fact just recently when some friends came to visit. And I will call them the Breakers, Al and Kara Breaker, and they're what my guy and I refer to as a drinking couple. Because of course we categorize our friends, and don't even try to tell me that you don't do this. We all know who our friends are, and we consider them in a certain way, not to be mean or discriminating, just efficient. Like, I'm not going to ask a non-drinking couple to meet us at a dive bar any more than I would ask a work couple to join us for a burlesque show. Admittedly, this is not a foolproof system. Lord knows there is a little bit of crossover, and sometimes unexpectedly so, but for the most part, it does set expectations. Especially when it comes to the Breakers. Al is an old musician buddy of my guy's, one that married a Southern belle and now lives in Georgia. He and my guy reconnected about 5 years ago, and we've been getting together sporadically ever since. As for Kara, I adore her. She reminds me a little bit of Meryl Streep playing Julia Child as a Southern woman. Just all drama and swooning. She is just adorable. Al is every bit the musician, a charming, always work in the room kind of guy who would be completely mismatched with Kara if it weren't for their consuming love of a good time. Every single outing with these two ends in ruin, drunken, moral, or otherwise. This is why my guy and I will only ever get together with them on a Friday, because we know that we need a 2-day recovery budget. So when the Breakers informed us that they would be stopping over in New Orleans on their way to Texas, well, my guy and I braced ourselves accordingly. I imagine this is how others feel when they're getting ready to hang out with us. Hopefully excited and possibly a little edgy. For me, though, my biggest concern was making sure that our friends experienced the best of the French Quarter. I do this when anyone visits us here. And it's not so much a plan as it is just a review of my mental map. Because nothing annoys me more than going to hang out with someone and hearing, "So, what do you want to do?" "I don't know. What do you want to do?" Believe me, I am all for going with the flow, but a good host knows how to find a fucking current. And I am nothing if not a good host. So, Al and Kara, they arrived early on a Friday afternoon. It's been almost a year since we've seen them, but it felt as though we hadn't missed a single day. Some people are just like that, and I am definitely not one of them. You know, the kind of people who are just so open and free with everyone around them that it feels as though you've been besties forever. Kara in particular is very good at that. Her hug was like a mink coat, whereas my own hugs at their best are bumbling and crude. I just never know where to put my body without feeling like a creepy uncle. I guess it's just that southern charm that I haven't found yet, and Kara's can put you at ease in an instant. It's not long before she and I have linked arms, and we're strolling down Royal Street with my guy and Al trailing behind us. She's already leaning in and confiding to me that Al has been making her crazy lately. There's no real reason why, other than the fact that he just exists. But she often wonders what life would be like without him. All I can do really is sympathize and suggest that, maybe being out of the house on this trip will be good for them. And she laughs when I say this, and then lowers her voice and asks me in that luscious southern drawl of hers, "Honey, don't you ever fantasize about how easy it would be to take these boys out?" I know, my southern accent blows, but bear with me. So, at first when she says this, I think she's referring to being out on a date, like we are now. But her raised eyebrows tell me otherwise, and I realize that by out, she means out of the living world. Oddly, this is not the first time I've had this conversation. My guy and I will often joke about how I'll take him out for the insurance money, and to us, the idea is delightfully evil and not at all serious. But there is something in Kara's eyes that makes me wonder if this might be something she's actually considered. Oh, lady, quite honestly, I need to be at least 3 or 4 drinks in to have a how to murder your husband chat. So I do my best to laugh it off, and I suggest we just get to the first bar before she gives me any tips. My loose plan is for us all to drink from one end of the quarter to the other, with assorted stops in between for food and gallery hopping. And thankfully, once we are all settled and lubricated, the talk takes a less severe edge. I introduced Kara and Al to our favorite bartenders. We ate fresh oysters and decadent gumbo, and I was able to show off my adopted home. In fact, there is so much talking and laughing and hanging out that it wasn't until we were en route to our third bar that I noticed our foursome had more than doubled. This is a thing here, it is. Groups kind of merge in the quarter. Good conversation and drinks just kind of do that. And I cannot tell you how many times my guy and I have been absorbed by parties of strangers and paraded from one bar to the next. This, however, is the first time that I have ever led this kind of group myself. And it was kind of an awesome feeling because it made me the local. Something that I've always wanted. So I look behind me and I'm trying to recall who each of these people are. There are 2 guys visiting from Biloxi, 3 girls who drove in from Ohio, and some random solo chick who seemed to like Al just fine. They all wanted to know the best places in the quarter, and I was happy to show them. Everywhere we went, I had a fucking story to tell. Like how Truman Capote used to claim he was born in the Monteleone Hotel, and how William Faulkner would hang out in the courtyard at Sylvain. I even pointed out the second oldest wall in the French Quarter. And the more that I drank, the more the line between considerate host and drunken tour guide blurred. But even if my facts were maybe a little wonky, at the very least, my cocktail recommendations were spot on. So I assumed that my little group of friends and tourists was more than happy to wander up and down the streets and listen to my dumb little story nuggets. And they were, mostly, except for Al and Kara. Had I been paying better attention to my friends, I would have noticed that Kara stopped listening to me about 2 cocktails ago. Her focus is now on Al, whose focus is, sadly, on the single blonde chick. They had dropped to the way, way back of the group and have that flirty, drunken lean that strangers get just before they fall, right into bed. Kara is just a few steps ahead and seething like a woman who has been here before. Were I a considerate, not just friend, but human being, I would have called an end to our impromptu drinking tour and hustled that damaged and drunk couple back home. There they could sleep it off and then duke things out in the privacy of their own car when they left the next day. I'm not considerate. I'm not even observant. I'm an asshole who is so hopped up on having an audience, I just keep blathering like a dim-witted Pied Piper all the way to the LaLaurie Mansion. Have y'all heard of Delphine LaLaurie? She was a New Orleans social climber in the 1800s who also happened to be a vicious torture fiend. What's known as her home stands on the 1100 block of Royal Street, and it is the crown jewel of every ghost tour here in the Quarter. So much so that there's one in progress as my own little group approaches. The leader of this tour has clearly seen one too many Marilyn Manson videos and is decked out head to toe in pleather. Her black parasol is doing very little to combat the Louisiana heat, and her makeup has formed swampy little pools in the creases of her face. She's quite the storyteller, I will give her that much, and she has worked herself up into a serious lather over LaLaurie. According to her, LaLaurie was conducting elaborate human experiments in the attic of her home. Everything from primitive surgery to reshaping people into animals. And not surprisingly, her spirit and those of all the people she killed linger there today. Look, no one knows for sure what happened inside LaLaurie's house. The only credible sources of information come from newspaper articles after a fire revealed some admittedly horrific atrocities. But an attic full of inhuman monsters? That's a little too far-fetched even for me. But I am not one to ruin a good story, so I quietly pull my group to the corner and I offer my own interpretation of LaLaurie's lore. It's not quite as grim or grisly as the others, but it is, I think, more real. And what I can say for sure is that the building towering over us is most definitely not the same one that LaLaurie lived and murdered in. That building was burned to the ground by an angry mob, and rebuilt years later into what we're now looking at. As for LaLaurie, well, she escaped the mob and fled to Paris. She never stepped foot in the current building, only the ground below it. And with this, I decide that the only reasonable thing for any of us to do is get more cocktails. I try to hustle everyone away as unobtrusively as I can, because this wannabe Manson guide is still at it, and now she's blabbing away about some angry ghost girl who lives on the roof. She turns to me as I try to scoot past, and she says, "You got that wrong, you know. Were this any other city on the fucking planet, I would have dismissed her completely and just walked away. But somehow, New Orleans makes me want to engage. And I swear it's more than just the cocktails. I mean, here, I actually find myself liking people and thinking good of them initially. which is the exact opposite of how I am anywhere else. So I'm thinking that the guide is just being friendly, and maybe she wants to share a story, and there's nothing I like more, so I'm all ears when I ask what she means. She sighs then, as if I am just not worthy of any of this, and gestures toward the building, and she says, "This is Madame LaLaurie's home." She says it as though LaLaurie herself is watching us from the window, and I realize the guide isn't being friendly. She's defending her turf. Which annoys me because seriously, who gives a ghostly fuck? So I admit I may have been just the slightest bit of an ass when I respond with, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure it belongs to real estate developers now, but, whatever." Yeah, them's fighting words. She takes in my dripping, mostly empty cocktail cup, my jean shorts and flip-flops, and rightly makes the assumption that I am not of her kind. She asks me, "Do you have a license to be giving historical tours?" And I'm all, "Really, honey? Show me a historical reference for your attic full of flayed crab monsters, and then we'll talk about licenses. Besides, I'm just showing a couple of friends around." A few cocktails aside, I definitely wasn't charging anyone for it. But the guide is all up on her high ghost horse and informs me that there is a $300 fine for leading an unlicensed tour in the quarter, and that she's going to call the cops. Yeah, it's about at this moment when I realize I am in way over my head. What I need now is my guy. If there's anybody who can defuse this situation, it would be him. So I start to look around. I look behind me, and then I find him across the street, legs stretched out and sitting on the curb with a fresh cocktail in his hands. Where or when he got that drink is beyond me. And when I catch his eye to implore him for help, he just raises the cup up to me as if to say, "Good luck with all that. Thanks, baby." All right, I got myself into this. I'll get myself out. So the guide is rooting around in her purse, and she's looking for her phone. And all of the people that we'd led to this point, like my guy, are just standing back and excited to see what's going to happen next because, they're going to get to see a real New Orleans arrest. All right, I am trying desperately to think of a way to gracefully talk myself out of this situation, when Kara comes to my rescue by screaming, "I will fucking murder you." That's not exactly the tactic I would have used, but it does take the attention away from me. We all turn, and we see Kara standing in the middle of Royal Street, wielding an oyster knife. It's the same one that she'd used back at the restaurant, and I guess thought ahead enough to tuck in her purse. It looks kind of like a paring knife, I guess. Only it has a curved tip that is supposed to make it easier to penetrate hard shells. There, gleaming in the sunlight, I am confident it could do just as fine of a job on, say, an eyeball. Kara has the knife pointed toward Al. She is a tiny girl hurling big obscenities and making sure Al knows that she is done with his shit. Apparently, he'd been carousing with more chicks than just the one he'd met that day. Kara's sweet drawl is more evident than ever as she says, "I will cut you." And if she didn't look so fucking deranged when she said it, I would swear it was a compliment. Al has assumed the sorry stance and is imploring her to put the knife down. Somehow, though, his "chill out, baby" just doesn't seem like the most effective way to do this, but I'm kind of at a loss with better ideas. I mean, she's a crazy chick with a knife. Now, the blonde chick who had been all cozy with Al, she's now just as angry as Kara is. And she's staring him down with just absolute contempt. And she's saying, "You're fucking married? And your wife is right here?" She turns to Kara and she apologizes, saying that she had no idea. And then she suggests exactly where Kara should plunge that oyster knife first. And our crowd of tourists and ghost chasers, they're all nodding in agreement. I mean, all of them are feeling better about the situation since it's clear Kara's rage has a singular focus. But seriously, add a couple of pitchforks and torches, and we'd have all the makings of another angry mob. This one, hell-bent on watching a cheating dickhead get gutted in the street. I feel my guy slip in behind me and the tour guide. She's finally found her phone, and my guy nudges her, saying, "Yeah, now might be a good time to call the police." But before she can even turn her phone on, she's interrupted, again, not by an oyster knife, but by a brick. It crashes on the sidewalk in front of us, where it erupts in a cloud of jagged fragments and dust. The sound is so unexpected and so very unnatural that it stops everything. The yelling, the mob, all of it. And we all slowly turn our gaze upwards. There's only one place it could have come from: the top of the LaLaurie Mansion. My guy calls out, "Who's up there?" But he doesn't get an answer. Nothing. Just a shifting of the wind, which cuts through all of us with a very chilly edge. Whew, if there ever was a good time to get the fuck out of there, this would be it. The guide quickly corrals her group and leads them off, shaken and jumpy, and more convinced than ever about the ghosts of the LaLaurie Mansion. My own little group breaks apart, with a few quiet waves and concerned glances back at the empty roof, while Al and Kara follow us back home. We didn't say very much to each other until the next morning. The first thing I did was apologize to Al and Kara for abandoning them to my ego. I felt pretty shitty about that, as if I could have salvaged their relationship somehow by paying more attention to them as a friend and not the resident welcoming committee of New Orleans. Because I am, of course, assuming that these two are through. It's not my business, but in my world, pulling a knife on your spouse is typically tantamount to divorce. But then I really look at Kara and Al, and I see that the two are as lovey as ever. They're smiling and cooing and kissing so much that I can't help myself. I have to ask, are y'all okay? Because you seemed pretty pissed at each other last night. Kara just giggles and Al shrugs. He says, that was nothing. Last time we got into a fight, she stapled divorce papers to my back. He gives Kara a squeeze as if these two have a perfectly healthy relationship, and who knows, maybe they do. But then he frowns, just a little bit, and he asks, "So where the hell did that brick come from yesterday?" And now it is my turn to shrug. Maybe it was the ghost of the little girl who died at the LaLaurie Mansion. Or maybe it's just an old building shedding some dead weight. I don't know. I'm finding that there are a lot of things I still don't know about New Orleans, but I will tell you this much. It certainly seems to enjoy getting the last word. Cheers, y'all. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Unwritable Rant Podcast. Don't forget, if you want more bourbon recommendations and you want to chat with me live, join me on YouTube every Monday night at 7 p.m. Central. I host a little show called Bourbon-Soaked Live, and you can find it at the Juliette Miranda YouTube channel. There is a great group of people who hang out in the chat, and we all talk and discuss what we're drinking and what we're watching and all sorts of fun stuff. Also, you can go to theunwritablерant.com to catch up on all the back episodes of this podcast and find out what I'm up to. I will be back next Sunday with my Halloween episode of the podcast. Until then, I hope you all have a great week. Cheers.
Go to theunwritablерant.com and sign up to get early access to interviews and new videos. And don't forget to connect with Juliette on Twitter at Morning Neurosis.
Girl, you as pretty as a Sunday morning, standing on the corner at Carondelet. What you say we make our way up to Bourbon, a couple hurricanes and a hand grenade, and get blown away. Let the chips fall where they may. If it's all the same, what you say, bon ton, hey, pretty mama, I can smell the gumbo. Sweetest taste of honeysuckle on my lips. Good God Almighty, I can hear the trombone. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this. Come a little closer, honey, let me hold you. Nothing tastes better than a bourbon kiss. You can be the flower on my magnolia. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this.